Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Generosity Workshop series. My name is Christy Mora, and I am on the team here at Generis, where every day we are inspired to help leaders like you move the needle on generosity. I'm going to go ahead and ask our two hosts today, John Bennett and Brad Leeper. They can go ahead and join me on camera. Hey, John.
Hey, Christy.
Hey there. So in today's workshop, we are talking about activating and engaging with non-givers. And, during our last session, if you joined us last week, Jim and Julie discussed how engaging with all levels of givers requires intentionality. But today, John and Brad will talk through reaching one of the most challenging giver groups, and those are the non-givers, and explore some reasons why someone has yet to take the step in financially investing in your church and what opportunities exist there. So before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and take care of some housekeeping. So this workshop is being recorded. We will share a copy with everyone in a follow-up email that will go out tomorrow. That'll go out to everyone who is here with us and those who have registered. After John and Brad wrap up this presentation that they've prepared, we will move into a Q&A session. So that means throughout the presentation, feel free to drop in your questions in that Q&A box. There's no need to wait till the end. Go ahead and drop them in there. And the chat is available. So introduce yourselves, let us know who you are, where you're tuning in from. And that's all for me. We'll spend no more time on housekeeping and let both Brad and John just take it away.
John, let's dive in. Very important topic here around non-givers within a church context. As we'll unpack throughout the day, there are a couple reasons why this topic is so critical. First, there are a lot of people that attend your church and would declare that attending your church is a high value to them. They're a regular attendee, but fail to engage in giving. And you're going to unpack that for us as to why that may be and how to move them. We would always want to engage more people in biblical stewardship and discipleship. We also, John, are coming back into the post-COVID world. Where is all this going to land with people coming back to church, whether that be online or in person or wherever that may be? And they may have not engaged in giving, or they may have gone passive in their giving. How do we re-engage them as if they were a non-giver, which is really interesting. And then lastly, and this is more art than science, as you will unpack, we're going to have a lot more people watching us online than ever walked in the front door of our church to check us out. Good grief. How do we think about engaging them so early in the relationship process with the church? So you're going to unpack some ideas around all that today. John's background is both from a pastoral perspective. I've been a pastor of a church. He also has coached hundreds of chief executive officers and pastors in developing financial resources for their churches and organizations. John is an amazing practitioner of how do you get this done in a very practical and pragmatic way. So John, thanks for joining us today. Dive in. What do you mean non-giver? And give us an orientation to this very important topic.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, Brad. Thanks for joining me and joining us. And thank you for all the folks that are out there. I just saw that Jeff Gunn from Phoenix, my friend, my pastor friend, whose church we're actually engaged in a project right now. So it's good to have you, good to have everybody with us today. But you're right, Brad, this whole idea of engaging the non-giver is an incredibly important topic to cover and talk about. So I think, first of all, let's just break down what we mean by non-giver. You sort of defined it well in the beginning. You have those who are attending and yet have not financially engaged in the church yet. And then you have those who have been giving consistently, but for whatever reason, they've downshifted. They no longer are giving at the level or giving at all to your church. And so we want to talk about those two groups, as well as that sort of wild card you talked about. In the digital universe, a lot of people are out there watching us online. And what does that mean for them? Do they engage financially? Do they not engage financially? Interesting, was having a conversation with our friend Jim Shepard 2 days ago, and he talked about a very small data slice that was coming out of COVID, which said that 40% of churches were actually down in engaging new givers coming out of COVID. Now that statistic's a little bit tough if you start to think about every year we're dealing with some kind of lapsed givers, those who move away, lose a job, or they go from 2 incomes to 1 income, something goes on where they downshift or don't give it all. So we're going to have that as part of the equation every year. But then when you consider right now that acquiring or engaging new givers is actually down, at least in this small data slice, down by 40%. That's a pretty serious conversation that we need to have in and around engaging the non-giver. The other thing I'd like to say is that all these things we're going to talk about today are all discipleship type conversations. In other words, these are pastoral issues that I think can be resolved or at least addressed from a spiritual standpoint, a theological standpoint, an engagement standpoint, as a pastor, as a staff member, as a key volunteer in the church around this person to help them get engaged around the church. So for just a few minutes, let's talk a little bit about the person that's attending, but they're not engaging financially. So let me just share my screen here. So just make it easy if you're taking some notes, and it'll help you kind of just remember some of these things. So let's talk a little bit about non-givers who have not engaged with the church so far. Who are they? I think that's point number one. That won't actually even appear on the screen, is that we do need to understand how to track them, how to segment out our list, our database, so to speak, so we understand who may be attending and yet may not be engaging financially. That's a conversation for a little bit later, but let's start with this. Here's some reasons why people may not be actually engaging financially with us as a local church. First reason is they don't understand why giving to the local church is so important. Now, you remember the Simon Sinek book, as well as the TED Talk that has a gazillion views, where he talked about the idea that people buy into why before they buy into what. And what that means when it comes to giving to the local church, the what is you can give online, you can give digitally, you can give by check or cash in an envelope. Those are all the tactical ideas of offerings and giving to a local church. But the why is the discipleship conversation. It's the idea of my heart getting engaged in the local church. So part of the question here when it comes to why is why not just give. I don't think it's a giving problem. It's a why should I give to your local church problem. In other words, is that my responsibility? Is that what I'm supposed to do? Am I supposed to engage like this? I'm sure this place is getting taken care of other ways. When I walk in a nice building, the lights are on, there's a staff, they must be doing pretty good without me. Why should I engage in the mission of your local church? I still remember a couple of years ago, I attended a very large church here in Atlanta. Pastor got up and said, on the screen, as he's pointing to the screen, 30% of you support 99.9% of the work that goes on in this church. That means 70% are in the category of being a non-giver. And I'll never forget, he began to unpack that reality that 30% were doing all the heavy lifting, 70% were doing very little, if nothing at all. And he took personal responsibility for that by simply saying, this generosity thing, this giving thing is a discipleship conversation. And I have not done a good job really unpacking that for you to explain to you why giving is important, but more importantly, why giving to a local church is so important. And he did a brilliant job doing that and trying to engage this group of non-givers. So I think the antidote to this whole first point here of why people don't give and why they don't understand the reason behind it is what I would call the offering moment. So in a church context, 52 times a year, you have an opportunity to receive an offering. We don't take an offering, of course, we receive an offering. 52 opportunities, even if you're not passing the plate anymore, which seems to be a trend that's not going away, but is certainly on the decline. People are not passing the bucket or the plate as much as they used to. There still is an opportunity in the offering moment to go back to why the heart of generosity is so important. And we think about it for a moment when we're preparing for the weekend, the communicator spending hours on the message. The band hopefully is rehearsing like crazy to be as good and as excellent as possible. But that offering moment is kind of overlooked. It's forgotten. It's like, hey, let's just kind of do this. You get up this week and thank everybody for giving. And it's not intentional and systematic, Brad, in order to get people to really buy into the why.
The why is obviously a huge motivation behind everything that we do as humans and why we engage with our church matters. And John, would it be safe to say that coming back into the fall, that most of our givers, major givers, regular givers, core givers, and even non-givers are really looking to us as leaders to affirm again the why of the church, no matter what level of giver we are?
Yeah, I would think, yeah, absolutely. Because let's face it, we've been quarantined, we've been isolated, we've been watching online. We're not life on life. We may have been to a small group, we may not have been to a small group. We probably have missed the macro vision of exactly what's going on. And so, because we've been out of the building, because we haven't been there in person, I think it's like we need to step on the gas and pour fuel on the fire of the idea of stoking the why, the vision all over again, and maybe even to a fault where we're explaining it over and over again. Because what we've been out of sync, we've been out of the room, we've been out of the church family, so to speak. And so I think that's incredibly important. That's a really good point, Brad.
Mhm.
Let me give you the second reason here, and that is they don't think that their gifts, let me go back there, they don't think their gifts are actually making a difference in the lives of others. This is an incredibly important point. I learned this as a lead pastor. I remember I was a church plant, things were growing, exciting things were happening. And as the pastor, I was hearing all these stories of life change. I mean, I'd say weekly, I was getting email, text messages. People are going, "Hey, John, this ministry we've got going over here, it's working. This is happening." And I was kind of a collector of stories for a while. And I'd share it with the staff or I'd share it with my board or whatever. And all of a sudden I have an epiphany. Listen, I am not allowing the people who are giving so generously to understand what's going on. So it changed me. So at least once a month, Brad, I was getting up and I was going, let me connect the dots between your generosity and the life change that's actually happening in this church. So let me give you an example. This is hypothetical, but this summer, I mean, a lot of kids have finally got back to camp. I know a big camp that you and I worked with. They're like back to capacity this summer. It's a big deal. Kids are going back to camp, or maybe they went to teen camp or the youth group, that type of thing. So let's say this Sunday I get up and I say, "Hey, I want you to know, because of your generosity, that 142 of our kids went to camp this summer. And by the grace of God, 38 of them found Christ." And that is exciting. So everybody claps, 142 and 38. But at the end of the day, those numbers are just numbers. So what if we kind of spun that just a little bit and we got up and I said as the pastor, "Hey, listen, we had 142 kids go to camp this summer. Because of your generosity, 38 of them found Christ. But let me tell you about Emily." And Emily intersected with our church 2 years ago when their family started coming. And this is the details about Emily's life and her faith journey. And now she's found Christ. Now think about that for a moment in the eyes or the mindset of the non-giver. He's there or she's there listening to the story. And all of a sudden, maybe there's a picture of Emily up there and their mind starts going back to their growing up years, maybe their camp experience or there's something of that nature. And they begin to get their heart opened up to this idea that when I give generously or when I begin to give to that local church, life change happens. It's not 142, it's not 38, it's one, a story of one person, Emily, in whom great things happen. I think that's pretty cool, Brad.
That is, it crystallizes or illustrates in one story what happens for the many. In a very similar way, I was at an offering moment not too long ago. Oh, it was pre-COVID. It's not too long ago, but they showed with iPhone quality video the night before student retreat, which is what prompting this. They had 50 some kids that took a step of faith, and it was a baptism kind of a context. And the student pastor again through iPhone, "Hey, look at what's happening right now. These are kids from our church that are having this experience." And we in the congregation, 16 hours later, are looking at this as if it were happening live. It was a magical moment that said, "Wow, my church is really on top of things here." It was free. It was iPhone level quality. It was easily sent online. Production team showed it. It made the whole offering moment then became, "You want to see more of that?"
Yep.
Just because of what you're giving here. So your story your prompting there is very important, very valid.
Yeah, I love that. Because at the end of the day, I don't think we have a giving problem. If you think about natural disasters that happen around the world, or maybe even to this country, and you think about millions and millions of people that give that maybe not normally give, obviously the stories are the thing that engage their hearts. I don't think they're just wanting to hold back as much as they really just want to help somebody. And I think that's exactly what you just illustrated really well there. So let's talk about the third reason. And again, there may be a lot of reasons, there may be 33 reasons. I just came up with 3 here to kind of understand again why the non-giver is not engaging with your local church. And I think this last point kind of summarizes a lot of what we're dealing with our age in our particular culture, is they don't think they have enough to give. And I think that's a pretty important phrase. And I kind of wrote it that way because I think it's not that they don't have enough to give, it's that they don't think they have enough to give. We've heard the statistics that, in this country, that if you have a family that makes an income of $63,000, they're in the 0.17 percentile of the richest people in the world. And for some reason, those statistics don't actually move the needle, but it's kind of interesting to realize that $63,000, you are at 99.8% of the richest people on the planet. But I really think it's more like our friend Jim Shepard says, it's when you go from this priority thing of my living drives my giving rather than my giving drives my living. So in other words, all of us have priorities. I've got mortgage, I've got kids, I've got things I've got to take care of financially. And typically it's a reverse of order priority, right? It's my living, all my expenses, all these things that are going on that are driving my giving, which is typically the leftover. And in order for that to shift, or in order for that paradigm to shift, there has to be a theological foundation that's built into our minds about this. In other words, not just the stories being told about the mission being fulfilled. This is now a conversation about me, my money, and God. So how does that actually work? How do I go from my living drives my giving, because you don't understand, I've got bills, I've got these things I've got to do, to, you know what? It doesn't really matter what's coming in. It doesn't really matter the obligations. I'm going to prioritize my giving over my living in such a way that I believe I'm going to honor God with my first and my best every time. And that's where I think we go from I don't have enough to I don't think I have enough to, you know what, no matter what's going on, I really need to prioritize what God is doing in my life. And that part of the money conversation, I believe, can really change people, not just to open up to giving. And this is the point to a lot of pastors right now, not just to engage them financially, but to engage their entire life around the lordship of Jesus. All of a sudden, it's like everything belongs to him. And I really want to take that next step. And I believe once they begin to get over that, get and deal with that conversation about having enough to give and their giving driving their living and living driving their giving, I think once that conversation had, I think that they actually will become better volunteers. They'll be better followers. A lot of times they'll get involved in small groups and so on, because something begins to shift on the inside that really engages them with the discipleship process in the church.
That's good insight, John. As Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart is. And as people give, they are essentially signaling to you that they have taken a deeper step of relationship within the church. Once somebody parts of their possession and gives an organization, they've taken a deep step of engagement, which is all about engagement this fall, right? It's, will our people engage? Will they engage in volunteers? Will they engage in groups? I can make an argument that your really engaged group are those people who give above a certain threshold financially each year. So that's a very important piece to understand. Even when we coach, as John and I would coach our church clients, as first-time givers come online, we need to identify who they are very quickly, say thank you, and then pass that information on to a groups person. If they're not in a group, they're far more likely to say yes to group engagement, or to a volunteer or a staff person that would like to enlist some more volunteers. It could be a very fruitful group of people to engage in a relationship and to explore if a volunteer role for them is the right timing for all that. So that engagement piece, John, signals a lot of potential activity to go forward.
Absolutely. I love that, Brad. And I think that'll kind of set up the payoff pitch of this presentation at the end. We do want to talk about a very specific strategy, which you just kind of outlined the spirit of, that hopefully will help everybody on this call or on this webinar, listen to this webinar, that they can actually walk away with a real practical plan to do that. So, hey, we talked about in the beginning that there's two different groups of people: those who are attending and not engaged yet, but then there's a second group or second category of those who were giving consistently, but for whatever reason, they've downshifted. The first thing I would say again, and I've said this beginning, is that all these different reasons we talk about are all pastoral in nature. So in other words, as a church leader, we have an opportunity to do this. But when it comes to somebody actually downshifting their giving, you have to start with the presupposition that somebody is watching the trends. So if John and Beth are giving at a particular level and all of a sudden we downshift, somebody's actually got to be watching for that. It doesn't have to be the pastor, executive pastor, but somebody in the finance team has to be watching. And we'll probably show you just a quick slide here in a few minutes of a particular platform that I have at least one client using right now that's very helpful to watch that trend. But these things are important to watch when it comes to somebody who's attending, giving consistently, and all of a sudden something changes. I find there's basically three reasons that happens. Number one, if they shift or downshift, they have a God problem. In other words, it's like they were trusting God, they were trying to do the God thing, the Bible thing, the tithing thing, something was happening, and then all of a sudden they hit the wall, they hit disappointment, their expectations were not met, something just happened, and all of a sudden they ended up with a God problem or a spiritual problem. I remember when I was pastoring as a lead pastor, I had a guy in my church named Todd, and he was just the poster child of a great volunteer. He was giving consistently. He and his family, their family loved the church. His wife was in the worship team. They were amazing. But Todd actually invested into a franchise. He had a good job, but he invested into a franchise, trying to just be a savvy investor. And it was a great franchise. It was a great model. And for whatever reason, about 2 to 3 years into this investment, it went south. They went out of business, and he was left-handed a pretty strong bill. I mean, it cost him a lot of money. Fortunately, I had a pretty good relationship with Todd, so he reached out, we sat down, and he's like, John, I don't know what to say. I've been reading the Bible. I've been doing everything I know how to do. I've been giving consistently, and all of a sudden this happened. I hit disappointment, and I don't know what to do about it. And I'll tell you right now, as a pastor, I didn't have a bunch of great answers for him. But what I did was listen to him, help him process through why this may have happened, pray with him, and then walk with him spiritually for the next several months to see him get back on his feet. The end of the story is he's come back stronger than ever. But it was a God problem in that moment. It was something spiritually that hit him upside the head that he had to deal with, and that was a big deal. So the reason he downshifted was because he had a God problem. Secondly, people downshift because they have a church problem. And you guys all know this. If you're on this call, you know how this works. Somebody gets offended or something gets sideways. It doesn't work out the way that we thought it should work out. And all of a sudden they end up with an offense. And for the most part, what I've noticed about this as a church leader is that when they get offended, they will not come to the people that can actually resolve it. Typically, may share it with their small group or may share it with a friend or two, but something begins to happen. They get resentment in their heart and they begin to back away from their involvement in the church and they begin to downshift. If we can spot a trend like that, think about the power of a pastoral call in that moment. Hey, John and Beth, just want to reach out and see what was going on and have a conversation in around it. And sooner or later, probably what happened, I may say something to the effect of, the youth pastor said something to my daughter about 2 months ago, and she doesn't want to go back to the youth group. That statement alone is gold. It's not that you can resolve it right away, and you may never be able to resolve it, but at least you know what's going on. And at least at that point, Brad, you're able to kind of reach back out and see if you can't bring some reconciliation, help them process through, and save the relationship in the church because they've been offended. Brad, I think you're on mute, my friend.
John, it seems to me that most church problems flow out of misinformation or misperception. They think or they heard or they read something online and it turns out to be very inaccurate. It doesn't take much to make the adjustment and they go, that's so good to know because I heard, therefore it's redeemable. Their giving returns. You don't lose that giving. You don't have to replace that giving. You can solve it with often a very quick conversation. Plus you get the pastoral connection. Hey, my pastor cares. That staff person cares. I feel seen. I feel heard around here. Yeah, I like my church. I like my church after all.
Yeah, that's good. And full disclosure, Brad, I learned all these things after I was a lead pastor. Oh, I can't tell how many times I've looked at and thought about these reasons and shared these reasons with pastors around the country. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I would have known this kind of thing, I would have saved myself a lot of heartbreak along the way. So with those who are engaged in the church, giving consistently, and then they downshift, the reason they downshift is they have a God problem. We talked about that. They have a church problem. Finally, they got a life problem. So in other words, they got fired. They lost their job. Their wife got diagnosed with a disease. Something happened to their family. They're running their business and all of a sudden their top client that they had dropped them and all of a sudden their income dropped by 40%. Some life circumstance has come around them. It's squeezing the life out of them. And again, I've been around enough successful business types in my life, like you have, Brad, to know that a lot of times, especially men, not necessarily women as much, but especially men, we don't want to share that. We want to just suck it up. We want to internalize it. We want to fight it through ourselves rather than sharing some of these things. And for whatever reason that is, it could be ego. It could be just that I can handle it. It could be, I don't even know what to say. Whatever the reason is pastorally, if that trend is showing that something is changing with John and Beth, and you're able to reach out and able to have that conversation, it's amazing. I remember one story from one of our colleagues at Genera talking about a pastor's really good friend in the church who was a significant giver. And all of a sudden their giving shifted. And the pastor had a great relationship with this guy and did not know it until after the trend was recognized. He reached out and found out that his son had, I think, knee or back surgery, got on painkillers, got addicted to painkillers, got addicted, went to the streets. They found out. Next thing you know, he's in rehab at $75,000 a year, which affects everything. It affects you emotionally. It affects you as a parent. It affects your heart. It affects your financial bottom line. But again, thank God the trend was recognized. A call was made because even though there was a good relationship, the father was not talking about the problem for whatever reason. But yet, because there was a little bit of prying, that came out. Great pastoral moment, great opportunity to, just love the guy through this very, very difficult time.
Regardless if the giving continues or not, because we're in the people business, the soul care business, and privileged to be able to do that. So as we address pastorally the life problems, it's not the primary reason to get the resumption of the giving is to care for the person. But most of the time, the giving will eventually resume. Another pastor told me not too long ago, their top giver went for several months. And pastor reached out and it turned out the couple, rock anchor of the church, going through a divorce. Oh. And both of them said independently to the pastor, I was too embarrassed to tell you as a pastor that my marriage is failing. Well, that it surfaces a lot of other problems. Why was that pastor not safe or perceived not safe? And why is it a church that we need to have our act together instead of admitting that we all have the weaknesses in that? But isn't it interesting that the pastor was really the last person that they wanted to share the reality of what was going on there? But we all have life problems, and it's going to affect emotionally, financially aspects of our relationship with the church. John, a good question that came up here as we transition into some of the practical pieces here. Do we still pass an offering basket or plate? Had this conversation this morning with a very, very large church. My take on that was I wouldn't, simply because of the contact with the basket or the plate. People are skittish enough to come back to church, and we start passing things around. It's going to reinforce, I knew I shouldn't have come, especially with the Delta breaking out, the new strain of COVID breaking out. Better to place a box in the back or a receptacle in the back and invite people to give there. Even in some churches, the people who count or the staff who count don't want to touch the money. So you spray down with Lysol or whatever, but it does signify going forward. The offering moment is less about the transaction where you give, and it's more about the transformation, those things you're talking about here. It's who are we as a church? Why do we give? What's the impact of what happens? It's less about receiving that offering that day. It's more about building the vision and the awareness of the givers over a long period of time, more transformational than transactional. John, your take on the offering basket option now?
I love your point, Brad, about it going from a transactional moment to a discipleship moment. I still remember my dad was part of the counting team in a Presbyterian church growing up in the 70s. After church, after we got done running around as a kid, we would go and find the room. It was like, heavily guarded, and you have to knock the room and then crack the door open and, here's your kid, and they let me in. And I still remember my dad out there, they're counting the cash and the checks because that's all there was. Pass a plate, cash, check, that was it. And you think about how radically different 2021 is, not just the fact that we're in a digital age, but coming out of COVID. That is so true. And I agree with you. I think the passing of the plate is a very transactional deal, not a bad deal, but a very transactional deal. I think if we start turning the offering moment, and this is just subtle, but turning it into that discipleship moment in and around, listen, here's the why we think this local church is so important, why we think it's important that you grow in generosity, why we as a church leadership want you to manage money well, and we have programs to help you do that. So it goes back to the whole caring moment of going, we do need money to make this thing run. That's a simple business decision. But at the end of the day, how that actually flows is going to be totally different. So that may actually kick the entire idea of the digital giving conversation up, as well as the reoccurring giving conversation up. So it actually may end up being a good thing if we don't pass the plate as much,
Mm-hmm. That's very practical. Give us some more practical ideas. How do we engage non-givers, especially as we go back into the fall ministry season? It's going to be a big deal.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So let me share this for a minute. We talked a lot about, the trends. So it's easy for me to say on this side of the computer screen to you, hey, watch the trends, watch the trends, watch the trends. It's a little tougher when you're on that side. What do? This is a particular platform called Motorstone. I have some clients on this. I know Brad has some clients on this. If you'll notice the right side of the screen here, I'm circling right now this thing up top here. It says households at risk of lapse. This is the entire idea we've been talking about. They're giving consistently, they're downshifting. Households at risk of lapse. You can see this days without giving, 30, 60, 90, 120, 180. And then down here on the left-hand column, you can see this where it's basically John and Beth were giving weekly. John and Beth were giving twice a month, on down to John and Beth were giving infrequently. And then when we look at this entire idea of days without giving, I can actually click on that number there and it would bring up a name. So if I'm a business person watching these trends, I see that John and Beth haven't given for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. You can put a trigger in there, a prompt in there that'll help you trigger that pastoral conversation. So if somebody is watching this data, it'll give you an incredible opportunity for the pastoral moment. So again, I don't want to spend too much time here because this is a platform called Motorstone. You can engage Motorstone and see if this is right for you. But I wanted to give you an idea that there are some helpful tools out there to help you spot these trends we've been talking about. So let me go back to a moment. Let me go back to my PowerPoint and see if I can get this to work. What can we do right now to engage givers in our church? We just talked a moment ago about paying closer attention to the trends. Again, I cannot overestimate or underestimate or overstate or understate how important it is that we have somebody actually watching this. And one of the byproducts of our coaching at Generis, I have noticed that when we begin to talk about everyday giving systems, and this is part of that conversation, this is almost as much of a game changer as it is in leading a church through a giving initiative. Everyday giving systems are so crucial to the life flow of the church that's done in the right way, in a spirit of discipleship and in a spirit of pastoral care. The second thing is to create a new giver recognition strategy. Now, you remember, we'll circle all the way back to the introduction. We talked about in our little thin slice of data that we're seeing some trends where new giver engagement is actually trending down right now coming out of COVID. So we got to create a new giver recognition strategy. What would that look like? Well, here would be the question. When John and Beth attend your local church and John and Beth give a gift for the first time, what happens? Pastor, that'd be a great question to walk in your next staff meetings. Hey, when somebody gives for the first time to our church, what happens? And the question may be, well, if they wait till the end of January, they get a statement that says something to the effect of, you gave $250, use this for tax purposes. Or do we take advantage of that pastoral opportunity and thank them for engaging in your local church? Because here's the bottom line. If John and Beth are attending and I give for the first time, I'm kind of raising my hand and going, hey, I just want to let you know, I'm no longer anonymous. I'm actually here. I'm engaging my heart, and I kind of believe in what you're doing. And I just want to let you know I'm here. So what if John and Beth give for the first time and instantly there is some recognition, an email that goes out or a letter that goes out or a note that goes out and says, hey, our financial office let us know that you gave for the first time to our church. I just want to let you know how grateful I am that you are joining us in fulfilling an amazing mission that's transforming this community. If I could ever be of service to you, let me know. But I just want to say thank you for helping fulfill this amazing mission. And maybe there's even a story of something that's happened recently that it goes back to connecting the dots between generosity and life impact. Then the question is, what happens if I give a second time? So John and Beth give the first time, I get some kind of correspondence that says thank you. I give for a second time. What happens then? That's a good question as well. That'd be a great question to ask in the follow-up in your staff meeting. What happens the second time? The second time, maybe there's a correspondence that goes out, something to the effect of, hey, you know what? We have a lot of great things going on in the church here. One of those is our small group opportunity or Sunday school opportunity or life groups, community groups, whatever you happen to call them. Hey, John and Beth, we happen to know that there's a couple groups that are not too far from where you are, if you actually have that kind of data. And if it would be okay, we'd love to make an introduction for you to get the leader of those groups to connect with you, to have just a simple conversation to see if one of those life groups or community groups or small groups are a right fit for you and your family. It's just simply a recognition that you've given for a second time. And hey, maybe you want to know something more about what we're doing at the church, and invites me in, because again, this is an incredible pastoral opportunity, Brad, to go, listen, you're giving, that's a trigger to me, and letting me know that you want to take, maybe, possibly take that next step with our local church. Yep, I think you're still on mute there, bro.
Yep. I have a client that for the second gift, they send a $5 drink card to their cafe, drink as in caffeinated beverage, not alcoholic. And some business administrators or financial people will go, oh, that's unwise. We lose $5 on that. Well, if the second gift, if the average gift is $50, that's a pretty good return on investment there. But it also invites them into the community and the cafe. And some send a book. I'm not a fan of books. Who reads a book anymore? They send some kind of a stewardship book. I wouldn't head in that direction, but some kind of an engagement gift that says thank you, we recognize you, we deeply appreciate this. Just this morning, John, I was looking at dashboard information from a digital giving platform. Over the last 28 days, the church had 19 first-time givers and 12 recurring givers. The top gift was $1,000 first time, and the bottom gift was some bizarre $1.34 number. Like, okay, who gives $1.34 off their phone? Question: does anybody know the $1,000 first time giver? Facial expression. We have a dashboard. Who knew that we could? So I'm teaching them how to look at the dashboard, and it was, we have no idea who that person is. So even looking at your data, as you recommend very quickly, to understand what's really going on here and who is it that we can engage with, matters very deeply in all this. John, those of us on church staff, we hear this and think, for the love of Pete, we got enough to do. This is very labor intensive to set up the systems, to assign our staff are stretched. If I add one more thing to my ministry staff, I may not make it home alive tonight. Give us some guidance. Is this really worth it, or is this a pain in the backside that's just one more thing in the mix of many things?
Yeah, complicated question, but you had a simple answer, and the answer is yeah, it's worth it. It absolutely is worth it. And we've already explained about the ministry opportunity, the pastoral opportunity, understanding those kinds of things. But let me just say it like this: I think in the day and age that we live right now, nonprofits are very, very sophisticated. Those that are good, those that are growing or larger, are very, very good. So everything we've been talking about, they've been doing for decades. And they do it probably better than most churches I know. The idea is they know how to thank people very well. They know how to thank people creatively. I was on a little webinar the other day about the creative ways these nonprofits were thanking donors. It was blowing my mind. I couldn't write fast enough of these cool creative ways they were doing it. Secondly, they know how to then take that donor and get them engaged in the life of the nonprofit. Hey, could you swing by the building? Hey, could you attend this program? Hey, we wanted you to know that you could actually take a next step and you can actually serve with us at an event. They basically go from, you're participating with us, now we want to engage you into the life of what we're doing in the nonprofit. I say all that to say, if they're working that hard on somebody who's donating to their organization, and you're doing very little over here, who do you think after a while is going to get the attention? And who do you think after a while is going to get the financial support? It's not that difficult. I got a good friend of mine, I'll be with him this weekend. He gave a very large check to a very large church and got nothing. And he would never say it out loud, but he was offended because this was significant. And it was him going, here's a big chunk of my heart. And what you told me was, it didn't matter. And he was too cool about it. And he still attends the church. And he's not that kind of guy just to walk out and say, well, you didn't pay attention to my gift. But in his heart, I could tell it hurt him. And so I think there's something to be said there. Every time someone gives $1,000 down to $1.34, a piece of their heart is being given. So what are we going to do to steward their heart and their engagement with the local church, you know?
That's a pastoral perspective. The other piece of that is, if your current annual budget is $2 million and you go through these processes and systems and you grow that to $3 million, that's a win. It's a whole lot easier to do ministry on 3 million than it is on 2 million, or 2 million rather than 1 million. This all looks to feed that top line of the P&L statement, which is not why we exist, but it's a necessary function of our leadership to make sure that the mission is well funded. It's still pastoral and discipleship at its core, but those of us here are responsible for the fiscal responsibility and leadership of the church, and that top line piece is a big piece of that. John, we had a question that came in that is, again, very practical. The why around the discipleship opportunity. What are some good whys that can be shared in the 30-second platform? While you were talking there, I jotted down 3 ideas, but I would be very eager to hear yours. One why is because of your spiritual maturity in response to the gospel, in response to what God has done for you, that I'm engaging in giving. But the interesting piece around that is that giver is probably going to give the same amount no matter what church they're in. That's their own spiritual maturity function. And it could be first church or second church, they're still going to give the same amount. But that's a why. Just the good things that God have done in your life and on with you. Second is that vision and impact, which you explained for us. We're a church that's amazing. We're seeing life impact. We're reaching the community, changing the foster kid dynamics ratio, saving marriages, speaking into Gen Z, whatever that is. That's a great why that comes with that as well. And thirdly, people want to trust you. So a good why to unpack is, here are our systems and why you can trust us. I was chatting with the church last week where the pastor of a multi-million-dollar budget still signs the checks. And I trust the leader, and that's good. But even 3 weeks ago, as I walked that through, it was, you don't need to be signing checks. That just creates a lot of questions that you don't need to handle of a church that's a multi-million-dollar church like that. So trust is a big deal too. So I got maturity, vision, and trust. What would you add as to the why that you can throw into the 30 or 60 seconds?
Yeah, very practical. I think at the end of the day, too, from a macro standpoint, with our nation becoming where it is spiritually, I think that the church being known for generosity will be one of the hallmark parts of our vision moving forward. Think about the first century, second century, third century, no buildings, tremendous persecution, people are dying for their faith. But they were known historically, and you can read a lot about this, they were known historically for their acts of love, mercy, concern, and generosity. And it was in a very, very, very post-Christian environment, or not even an established Christian environment, probably a better way to say it. So I think in some ways, evangelism, outreach, those types of things are going to be known by our generosity in the community. So sometimes it goes back just explaining the why behind generosity. Yes, it is to encourage the mission of the church, but also it is to really let this church be a city set on a hill, a light that's shining, so that we really are making that kind of impact. That'd be one thing. I think the other thing I would talk about is eternity. There's something about the accounting and eternity that Jesus talked about not just storing up treasures on earth, but storing up treasures in heaven. There's something about the eternal account. There's something about giving, Matthew 6, in secret, so that your Father sees in secret can reward you in this life as well as in the life to come.
Well, very, very good. John, you would be available for additional conversation to unpack some of these ideas. Certainly, we've had significant engagement today with a lot of people sticking around for the whole time. So obviously, this is a hot topic and a very meaningful topic, especially as we come out of the summer through Labor Day. Where's all this going to go September, October, November? And how does this impact year-end giving? John and I would both be honored and privileged to talk to you about your own specific situation. No charge. Glad to do that. That's what we do at Generis. So connect with us, Brad at generis.com. John, was it John at Generis or John Bennett?
Bennett at Generis.
Yeah, John.Bennett. Yeah, 2 N's, 2 T's on that. And Christy will send some follow-up information as well as to get started. So it'd be our honor to help you think all this stuff. There's a big season coming up for year-end giving and engaging people. I think, John, this is going to be one of those rare moments that we can really move that needle in giving and build serious momentum coming into 2022. Could be more needed than ever if inflation hits, challenges our budgets, if the stock market goes down. Right now, giving is pretty stable, but it could be fragile. If it drops off the shelf and shatters a little bit, let's get ahead of that potential. And it could be the best year in giving that we've seen in many, many years in church giving. So let us help you get prepared for that. All right, Chrissy, over to you.
Of course. Well, thank you guys. That was such a great session. I know we had a bunch of questions and there's still some there. So the 2 people who dropped questions in the Q&A right at the end here, I'll make sure that both John and Brad get those so that they can respond. Thank you both. This was awesome. Like you said, especially as we head into the fall season. Thank you to everyone who sat and joined us for the last hour. We're so grateful to spend this time with you. And, just to reiterate what Brad just said, if your church is struggling with reaching non-givers or just needing support and engaging your givers, especially as we head into the fall season, feel free to reach out to us. Our team would be more than honored to just to spend that time with you. In the chat, I dropped a bunch of links, so go ahead and copy and paste those. Those will be in the follow-up email with the recording, with the slides, but those are just some links of how to get started with Generis, how to connect with John, how to connect with Brad. I did resend that video link, and also we have 2 more workshops in this series happening at the next month. The next one is Uncovering Lids of Generosity, hosted by Jim Shepard. Jess Spieler and John Wright will be joining him for that conversation. And our State of Generosity Roundtable, this is looking ahead to a strong year end. We are all eyes on year end right now. So with that in mind, we have some resources coming up. So make sure you stay connected with Generis so you can get those directly into your inbox. And again, thank you everyone for being here.